האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, and Dobra Vietcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parsha Shmot. We're starting a new book of the Torah, the second book of the Torah, and we're going to learn Os Hey, section number 5. It's a small section, but a very interesting and important one, of course. And the Zera Shimshon is going to start with a pasuk from Parsha Shmos, which is Perek Aleph pasuk Yud. And this is right in the beginning of Paro coming up with his devious plans to entrap and enslave the Jewish people. So Pasuk Yud says, Hava nischak lo, come, let us deal wisely with it, meaning with the nation of Israel, with Bnei Yisrael. Pen yerbeh, lest it increase, lest the Jewish people keep growing. And it will be kisikrena milchama, when a war will happen, if Egypt goes to war against a foreign nation. V'nosaf gamhu also nenu, and Bnei Yisrael, the nation of Israel, will be added to our enemies. V'nilcham banu, and they will fight against us. V'olah min haaretz, and it will go up from the land. So Paro is making quite the assumptions here that he's telling his people, saying the Jews aren't going to be loyal to us. The Jews want to leave Mitzrayim, even though we've been so nice to them. Bnei Yisrael wants to leave Mitzrayim and go back to Eretz Canaan. And how are they going to do that? They're going to keep growing and get stronger and stronger. And they're going to wait for the right moment when there's a war, when Mitzrayim will be busy with a war against some foreign country or foreign empire. And then they will join our enemies and use that opportunity to leave the country, and they will betray us. That's what Paro said. And so therefore we have to deal wisely with them. We have to come up with a plan to protect ourselves from Bnei Yisrael, was the gist of Paro's statements. Os Hey, section number 5, Pasuk. The Pasuk says, Hava nischak molo, come, let us deal wisely with it, with Bnei Yisrael. Omru zichronim levracha. So Chazal in Maseches Sota said, Bakedera shebishlu, in the pot that they cooked, ba nisbashlu, and they were cooked. Chazal say about the Mitzrim, the Egyptians, Mitzrayim, in the pot that they wanted to cook the Jews in that same pot, they were cooked. So there is a simple way of understanding the Gemara, and then there's the deeper Kabbalistic way that the Zera Shimshon is going to explain it to us. The simple way that people generally understand that statement in Chazal is that the Mitzrim wanted to take the Jewish babies and drown them in the river. And in the end, that's what happened to them. Their whole army, with all of the cream of their manhood and their young men, were drowned in the Yam Suf. So that's how people understand by Kedera Shabishlu, and the pot that they cooked up, the plan that they cooked up, Bo'nis Bashlu. Hashem turned it on them, and according to the principle of Midah Keneged Midah, measure for measure, and Hashem drowned their army in Yam Suf. That's how people understand it. As I said, the Zera Shimshon, as we said, the Zera Shimshon is going to explain it differently. Hatam al hai lishna de kedera. The reason that Chazal used this language, this terminology of kedera, a pot. Why did they specifically talk about a pot? Chazal could have said the plan that the Egyptians had for the Jews got turned and used against them, or the punishment that the Egyptians planned to use against the Jews, to inflict upon Bnei Yisrael, was inflicted upon them. Why did Chazal use an analogy about a kedera, a pot, and cooking in a pot? Yesh lomar, we can say, Shah Mitzrim choshvu livloa chas v'sholem Yisrael beinehem. The Egyptians thought that they would be able to swallow up, God forbid, the Jews among them. They wanted to completely have the Jews assimilate and join them and lose their independence and lose their unique identity. Ulahosif koach betumas kliposam. And the Egyptians wanted to add strength to the impurity of their klipa. As we've said before, on the most simple level, the word klipa, which means a shell, an outer shell, is the term used in Kabbalah to refer to the kohos hatuma, the powers of impurity. So there's a little explanation required here, which is that the Egyptians thought that if they could absorb the Jewish people into their country and they could get them to stop keeping their own religious practices and their own customs and traditions, and they could absorb them and assimilate them into Egyptian society, then the Egyptians, would grow stronger in their tuma and their impurity and their powers of impurity and their klipa, because the concept is that if holiness, if the powers of holiness and purity are added to impure powers, are absorbed by impure powers, they make the impure powers stronger. And that's what the Mitzrim wanted to do. They wanted to absorb and assimilate into themselves the Jewish people. And they figured and they calculated on the fact that that would make their powers of impurity and make them stronger. Shekol hanitzotzos tovos, because all of the good sparks, shahayu bisharshe nishmos Yisrael, that were at the roots of the souls of the Jewish people, yiyu chas v'shalom, they would, God forbid, be nivloim batumos, swallowed up in impurity. So the Egyptians, according to what the Zera Shimshon is teaching us, were not at all unaware of the fact that the Jewish people, Bnei Yisrael at that time, represented kohos hatahara and v'hakadusha, the power of purity and holiness, and they, the Mitzrim, were an impure power. They were very much aware of that, and they calculated when Paro said, "Let us to his people, let us deal wisely with Bnei Yisrael." Zera Shimshon saying this was part of their calculation. Let us figure out a way to force the Jews to give up their own identity and their own practices and their own service of Hashem, and join us and be absorbed into our people. And then we will become that much stronger, not just from a physical or military or economic perspective, but we will become that much stronger in terms of our metaphysical power, our spiritual power, our kohos hatuma, our impure powers will be multiplied and will grow exponentially if we can absorb the Jews and all of their positive spiritual power into our nation. Kedei, in order, lahosif tuma al tumasam, in order to add more impurity, more strength of impurity to their already substantial powers of tuma, of impurity. Ki hakfirim shoagim latoref. As the pasuk in Tehillim says, the young lions roar for food, for prey to hunt. And what does this pasuk mean for our purposes? Ki yadua liyodechein. It's known to those who study Kabbalah, the ones who know chein. Chein means charm, and that's a reference to people who know the secrets of Kabbalah. They know that the pasuk in Tehillim about the young lions is saying that the kohos hatuma, the impure powers in the world, roar and call out for food. They want to absorb, they want to consume innocent, good, holy people, and then they will become stronger. And that's exactly what the Mitzrim wanted to do with Bnei Yisrael. Omnam. However, Mashe biyodam nital mehem, What ended up happening was the opposite. Mashe biyadam, what was in their hands, meaning whatever spiritual power the Mitzrayim had, nital mehem, was taken away from them. Not only did they not gain power, but whatever spiritual power they had was taken. She'oso ma'at shel tov, that little bit of good, shehoya beklipas Mitzrayim, that was in this shell of impurity of Mitzrayim, nivrera mehem, was separated out from them. Shegam erev rav olu im Yisrael, because the erev rav, the mixed multitude of Egyptians, went out of Egypt with Bnei Yisrael. And the Zera Shimshon here is referring to an idea that the erev rav who joined Bnei Yisrael, many of them were on a higher and more positive spiritual level than the rest of the country of Mitzrayim, which was a cesspool of impurity. And those people who represented the only little bits of Kedusha, little bits of holiness, the Erev Rav were the only people in Mitzrayim who had any kind of spiritual interest and potential. Those people left with Bnei Yisrael, which meant that that little bit of spiritual power that they had of a positive nature was taken away from them. The Nisharuhaim, and the rest of the Egyptians remained, ke klipas egos beli ochel, like the shell of a nut without the edible part, right? So picture, let's say, a pecan, or some people say a pecan, right? You got your shell and you crack it open and you get to eat the delicious pecan or pecan inside. Or if you're really lucky, you make a pecan or pecan pie out of it, right? But once you take out the inside that's edible, the outside is truly an empty shell. And that's what the Egyptians were left like after their the best of their people, the Erev Rav, left Mitzrayim with Bnei Yisrael. V'zehu, and this is what the pasuk means: Vayenayer Hashem es Mitzrayim b'soch hayam. Regarding the miracle of the Kriyas Yamsuf, the pasuk says Hashem stirred up Egypt within the sea, within the Yamsuf. They didn't just have the water come crashing down on them and all drown. They were stirred up, and the Egyptians came up and down like a washing machine, rotating. And so they came up and they could grab a breath of air, and then they went back down, and Hashem kept stirring up the waters so that they would suffer a longer and more painful death. Shedonam bechol tokev hadin kanoda. And this idea of stirring up the water also means that Hashem judged the Mitzrayim with all of the power of Hashem's judgment, kanoda, as is known, and he means as is Kabbalistically known. Vehoridam b'soch hayam, and he brought them down into the midst of the sea. Ratzalomar, this means to say, le'umka d'tehoma rabba, to the depth of the unfathomable deep depths of the deepest parts of the ocean, but it's a metaphor. Zera Shimshon is saying, yes, it's physically true that Hashem stirred up the sea and the Egyptians would go down and come back up and go down and come back up, and they ultimately perished in the depths of the sea. But it represents the fact, it symbolizes the idea that Hashem judged them without any restraint, without any compunction, without any limitations. He judged them le'omek hadin, to the complete depth of Hashem's power of judgment. The gloves were off, in other words, no holds barred. Umeata, next paragraph, and from now, Hoyu rotzim levashel Yisrael. Now that we understand what the ideas that the Zera Shimshon has developed, he said, let's go back and understand the Kedera metaphor, the metaphor that we started with when Chazal talked about the pot that the Egyptians wanted to cook the Jews in, Bnei Yisrael in. Or you wrote some levashel Yisrael. They wanted to cook Yisrael. What did that mean? Shehem Zera Kedoshim v'chulo tov. They understood that Bnei Yisrael were the descendants of holy people, very special holy people. V'chulo tov, and the nation was all good. They understood that Bnei Yisrael represented an extremely formidable, powerful, spiritual force for the good. And so they wanted to take them and cook them bikidei rasam, in their pot. Hainu bikli pasam. This means in their power of impurity, in their shell, their klipa of impurity. Kidei shekli pasam, in order that their shell, hainu kidei rasam, which is being referred to as their pot, tivla hatam hahu, would absorb that flavor. Here, of course, the reference is to the laws of kashrus when we talk about cooking something in a pot, and the walls of the pot itself absorbs the flavor of the food, and therefore we have such a thing as meat pots and milk pots and parif pots, because the halacha tells us that when you cook a certain type of food in a kedera, in a pot, it absorbs that type of food. So if it's a new pot and you cook a nice pot roast in there, now your pot has absorbed meat flavor and it's considered a fleshig pot. If, on the other hand, you cook a delicious milk pudding, let's say, and then it becomes a milchig pot, because that's what the dairy product is absorbed into the walls of the Kedera. And that's what the Mitzrayim wanted to do. They wanted to use what they referred to as their pot, or what Chazal is referring to as their pot, which is their klipa, their shell of impurity, absorb the Jews in there, take away the Bnei Yisrael's unique identity, and get the strength from them, absorb the flavor, so to speak, into their pot, which would give them the strength, the spiritual power they thought that Bnei Yisrael possessed. V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu hotzi mehakedera ma'at hatam shehaya ba mechelek hatov. Hashem did just the opposite. Hashem made it that none of the kedusha and the tara, the holiness and the purity of Bnei Yisrael, was taken away by the Mitzrayim. He stopped that. He prevented that from happening. And he took out of Mitzrayim whatever little bit of good that were in the walls of their Kedera, so to speak, that were in their pot, meaning in their society. V'hishlich b'mitzulos yom kol nafshosam. And by taking away whatever little bits of Kedusha, of holiness and positive spiritual energy that the Egyptians had, by taking that away, that enabled him to judge them with the harshest judgment and completely send their souls to the depths of the sea. V'zehu she'omar, and this is what the pasuk says, vayinatzlu es Mitzrayim. When Bnei Yisrael left Mitzrayim, it says, the Torah says, and they emptied out Mitzrayim. The usual way of understanding that pasuk is that they kept going around, as Hashem had commanded Moshe to tell them to do. They kept going around door to door, house to house, and saying to the Egyptians, hello, our Egyptian friends, we're leaving and we're going to serve Hashem in the Midbar. Do you have anything you might want to give us or lend us? And the Egyptians gave their gold and their silver and their beautiful clothing and their finest utensils and articles. So the pasuk is usually understood to mean Bnei Yisrael emptied out the wealth of Mitzrayim. But the Zera Shimshon is saying, symbolically and metaphorically, what it means is the Jewish people, based on the miraculous protection of Hashem, emptied out any of the little bits of holiness and good, positive energy, spiritual energy that the Mitzrayim had, and took it with them in the form of the Erev Rav when they left Mitzrayim. And this shows us the connection between two words, Vayinatzlu, they emptied out Mitzrayim, and Bimitzulos Yom, the Egyptians were drowned in the depths of the sea. There's a connection there that the Zera Shimshon is not explicitly stating, but what he's alluding to is that it is only because Bnei Yisrael took out the Erev Rav and took out every bit of the little bit of Kedusha that the Egyptians had, and they were left completely devoid of any holiness and any sanctity and any purity. Because of that, Hashem was able to judge them with the harshest punishments and judgments and bring them down to the depths of the sea. So the Zera Shimshon has taken the statement by Chazal in Maseches Sota that he started with this unusual phrase or this unusual teaching that the Egyptians were cooked in the same pot they wanted to cook Bnei Yisrael in. And he's given us an entirely new explanation of that saying by Chazal from a Kabbalistic perspective that has to do with the Egyptians' plan to make sure that Bnei Yisrael gave up all of its Kedusha and to have that holiness absorbed into the Egyptians, which would give them tremendous power. And that's, of course, what did not happen. And instead, whatever little bit of spiritual sparks the Egyptians had was taken from them and left Egypt with Bnei Yisrael. Yashar to joining with us and learning the Zera Shimshon this week. And God willing, we look forward to learning together in the Zera Shimshon next week.